Week 1. Where are you going? Jeez. Introduction to Linux. I will be presenting it this week. Usually we have a guest speaker, but this week it's yours truly. All right. That's boring? I'm boring? Okay. Yeah, kind of right. What is Linux? Oh my God. Come on. What is that? Yeah, this is Linux, everybody. All right, no, this is broken. It's not working. Oh, okay. You get all of them? Okay. All right. Technical difficulties. We're back. This is Linux. What is Linux? All right. So Linux is not an operating system. It's actually a lifestyle. If you use Linux, that's all you do. You are Linux. Good job. Actually, it's a family of operating systems. Usually you probably hear people talk about it, do you run Linux, whatever. Linux is actually the kernel that sits underneath all of that, which is, kernel is basically the low-level stuff that interacts between the hardware and user land. So when people talk about Linux, you'll probably hear them reference, it's just a bunch of different operating systems, which people normally call distros. You'll hear people say, I use this distro, you use that distro. He runs Arch, by the way. If you hear anyone say Arch, I run Arch. They run the Arch distro or Arch Linux operating system. So, yeah. Here are a couple of ones that you've probably heard of before. We have Debian, Debian, however you want to say it. I think Ubuntu is actually its own thing now, but Kali is based off of it, which you guys have probably heard about. That's a very popular penetration testing, security-oriented Linux distro or operating system. Then we have Red Hat, which CentOS. You'll probably work with that in system administration or a lot of the RIT classes. Fedora is just another version of that. And then we got Arch, which is only for the elite. If you use Arch, you are elite. You are the best. Arch users, yes. Then we have Red Star OS, North Korea's own Linux operating system that got leaked, and you can download it online and run it if you want to. That's how you know Linux wins again. All right. Why do you use Linux? What is this? I don't use it. I don't have it on my laptop. I use Windows. So what do you get with it? You get a lot of control. You get a lot of tunability. So you can pretty much change customize whatever you want on most Linux operating systems because it's completely, I know the Linux, a lot of it is open source and stuff like that. So you can go in and change stuff. But sometimes that control might be a little too much for users who just want a PC to use. They don't want to mess around with their PC all day. So it's good for the customizability part. With Linux, the command line is your friend. Most of what you will do is through the command line because that's probably the easiest way and most powerful thing on all of Linux. You honestly a lot of Linux distros sometimes don't even have graphics. It's just a command line because you can do everything through the command line. You have what are called package managers, which are basically that's how you install software. And there's a lot of packages out there. So for almost anything you want, there's a package for it, and you can install it really easily. But because Linux, it is a lot of stuff is open source or community based. Sometimes a lot of it is out of date or broken. So it's just you get a lot of customizability, but it's not always easy to use. It's kind of the trade-off you get. Also, because it's so customizable, it's really just the kernel. You can run it on anything. People run it on servers. People run it on tiny Raspberry Pis, or even just your laptop or desktop. It's super. It can do anything really. It can go on anything, do anything. All right. When you learn Linux, this is the one tip I will burn into your head. Read the man pages. There's a way to do it built in, where you just type man and then the command you want to run. So, and then it will give you a giant page, and you can scroll through it on the command line. Or, if you're lazy, you can also just Google man pages and then the command, and you'll get a nice online command, not command line, it'll just be a web page for all your man pages. These are so useful if you're starting out or looking for something. Obviously, you can do Googling afterwards, but the first place you should look is the man pages. It explains almost everything you need. And sometimes, bonus points, you can find cursed things in there because, not everyone tells you everything when you Google it, and you can find a nice little option. You can add commands, and it will kind of be cursed or broken or helpful. You never know. Read the man pages if you don't know what to do. Please. All right. So now that you kind of know what a Linux is, let's talk about how to use it. So, the command line. This is important. This is where you will do almost everything. Because we don't have to run a GUI, that means systems are usually lightweight and people just tend to not use it unless it's like a desktop purpose. So what you'll get is it has a lot of names. You can call it command line, CLI, people call it shell, bash, terminal, hacking window, whatever you want. It is this thing, command line. That's what they're talking about. So I kind of broke it down for you here. When you get the command line, you get a lot of information. This is bash. So when you're using bash, this is what you will see. You get the user you're running as, the host name of the computer, what directory you're currently in, and then you can type whatever you want here. There are many different types of shells. The most common one is bash. That's why people kind of just refer to bash sometimes. If bash, ZSH, SH, CSH, not computer science house. It's its own shell. And fish, which I've actually never heard of, but it was on the slides, and I was like, I guess I'll leave it. Yeah, so you can actually customize this whole thing right here in the bash RC and stuff like that. But that's what you'll usually see. This is where you'll work in Linux most of the time. So get used to it. All right, what are some commands? What did that skip? No, all right. What are some commands or the first things you should know to do? Here's some of your first basic commands. Who am I? That will tell you the current user you're running as. PWD, that stands for present working directory. So that tells you where you are in the file system, because when you're on the command line, you're in a certain file on the command line. Host name, what's the name of my system? And a lot of that, you get the 1 and 3rd one on the command line most of the time, but if you don't, you have that. IPA, that tells you your internet information. You've probably used this if you've done system administration, stuff like that. These are all your different adapters. This was just on a VM, so I'm not leaking anything. You get your IP right there. You get a lot of information. You can use a man pages to figure out what all that means if you want to. And then psaux, this is just a command that people commonly use. It shows you what processes are running. It's almost like the task manager of Linux. So as you see, you write in the command line, and it gives you this nice little output. All right, we're going to start with one of the most confusing topics first, because that's how I ordered it. So file permissions. This is a little hard to grasp sometimes. So basically, you have, when you list files, you will get this little thing right here. You'll see it in front of every file in every directory. It will tell you the read-write permissions of that file or directory. So here's a little breakdown of what all that means. Basically, it's basically a system of 3 binary digits breakdown, and the value you get will give you your permissions. So you have the other section, the group section, and the user section. This is the permissions for the group that owns that file. This is the permissions for the user that owns that file, and this is for everybody else. So when you get corresponding bits, 1, 0, like each one means something. So this one will mean, can you execute that file? This 0 or 1 means, can you write to that file or modify that file? And this R means, can you read the file? So you get 3 different permissions for 3 different groups of people. A 1 basically means something. And if you get numeric mode, you'll just see the straight up binary. So 5, when you have to change a command, you'll have to put in the number. So 5 is a 1, 0, 1. A 4 would be a 1, 0, 0. Something like that. So that's how file permissions work. There's also some special permissions, SUID, SGUID. So basically, that will just change that. I think SUID means you will, when you execute that file, you will execute with owner permissions. And SGUID means you'll execute with group permissions. That's a little confusing. You won't need that. Don't worry about it too much. So how do you change the permissions? So if you type ls-l, it will give you a bunch of information, and that will include the permissions of that file. You can change it with chmod, which will change chmod will change the different modes, and chown will change the owner of the file, which will be important when you're talking about this stuff. So I know that was confusing. I probably shouldn't have started with that. My bad. But that's how file permissions work. That determines what you can read and cannot write to. read, write, execute. Just remember that. Read, write, execute, read, write, execute, read, write, execute. 3 different groups. All right. Sorry about that. That was confusing. So how do you move through the land? How do you move through this command line? So you usually start out in your home directory, which this little tilde thing stands for. Tilde? I don't know. Squiggly thing. So I type present working directory. I start in my home directory for that user. You can change directory, cd change directory, using that command. And you type in the directory you want to go to. So I want to go to the RATSec directory in this one already. And then I change directory. I go to it. ls will list all the files in that directory. So I can type ls, and it'll show me all the files or folders in that RATSec directory. So we can see me go through this, cd into that folder, change directory into week 1, and then there's a file in there. So this is where we currently are, and I can read the file. Cat basically prints the contents of a file to the screen so you can see what's inside stuff. Important notes, if a file starts with a period, it will be hidden. And you can show that with the command ls-a, which means ls all, and it will show you all the hidden files. So yeah, this is how you navigate. CD to change wherever you are, ls to list what's in there, and cat to read the files. Cool. So file paths and like the file tree is really important in Linux because stuff goes in certain places, as with any operating system. Slash, just slash is where everything starts. That is the root file system. Everything is in the slash. So it starts with slash. That's why everything starts with slash. So etc is for all your config files. It will be /etc. That's where a lot of configuration stuff goes, like if you have to change your SSH configuration or you have to change your web page configuration. Usually there'll be a folder in the etc. Home is where all the home directories for all the users. So as you saw, the first directory I started out in was home Brayden. So you know that Brayden home directory was in the /home directory. If you plug in a USB drive or a external hard drive, it will all be in the mount directory. We have to set it up, but that's where you'll find any external storage stuff. Files, processes, they have their own directory. Metadata and running processes, they have a file for that. It's in the /proc, stands for processes. And then I'd say one of the more important ones is bin and user bin and sbin. So these are where your binaries or executables are. So when you type in a command, it's usually in these directories, and it looks for them in this directory. So when you type in ls, there is a ls file in bin or user bin or sbin, suser bin. So those are very important for executables. Then we have some relative locations. So these are almost like some shortcuts. If you want to go to your home directory, whatever user you're running as, you can use the little tilde. Why do I keep saying tilde? Is that a tilde? It is a tilde? Okay, I'm not crazy. So you can do cd tilde, and it'll take you to your home directory. It's a nice little shortcut. The current directory you're in is just dot. So if you're in a directory and you want to refer to that directory, you just do dot. If you do cd dot, you'll stay in the same place. Or if you want to run a file, do dot. And yeah, stuff like that, /. If you want to move up a directory, say I'm in home/Brayden and I want to go to just home, I can do cd ... That will move me up one. And so you can go to the parent directory that way. That's a nice shortcut. Another useful shortcut, if you switched file locations and you just want to go to the one you were last in, almost like a back button, you can use the tac, cd tac, and you'll just go back to that one. So that's a great one. Some pretty cool PCP, pretty cool file paths. So, users and groups. So, like any operating system, you have users and you have groups. We saw it in the file permissions slide. So, a lot of the user information is stored in a file called etc password. So, a really important file. This is where you can find the definitions for each user, and like all the groups are in and stuff. So, etc groups. These are where all the groups are. Those are 2 pretty important files. And every user in Linux has a unique identification number. It's called a UID. For normal users, this usually goes from 1,000 up. So like Brayden probably was UID 1000, and there's a couple other users in between like 0 and 1000 that are like service users, but you don't need to worry about that. And then the most powerful user in Linux is the root user, who has a UID of 0, and they can do whatever they want. They have pretty much full. They are the administration user. They have full permissions to do anything. That's why if you get something that gets execution to the root user, that box is screwed because they can do whatever they want. So if you can ever get your UID to be 0, usually that means you can do stuff as root. Yeah, so that's some important stuff about users and groups. If you need to make new users or groups, there's a command to do that. Usually when you install Linux, sometimes it will only come with just the root user and you need to add the user yourself, but usually during the setup process, you can add your own users. Okay, interacting with files. How do I do stuff with files? Because there's a lot of files in Linux. This will be important for your demos. So cat will just print the contents of a file no matter what it is. Sometimes this can break the terminal, so be careful with what you do it with. If it's a text file, a short text file, usually cat is fine. If you want to know more about that file, like what is in it or when was it made, stuff like that, you can do file, or stat2 also has that system metadata. If you want to look for stuff in general, you use the grep command. We'll talk more about that later. That is important for finding certain strings. You can use regex if you want to find certain things. It's a really good search command that has a lot of uses. Same thing with find. This helps you find files. This will be great during CTFs and stuff, or in general, honestly. There's a lot of options for that. We'll also go over that command later. Then we have some different ways to, read files, less and more. So if you type less or more and then the file name, it will give you, I think less is it helps you scroll through. So if you have a long file, if you do cat with a long file, it'll just blast it out to the command line and it will put you down at the bottom. And sometimes you can't scroll up. Well, less will give you a nice little scrolly thing that you can go through. Thank you, CyberRange. Come on. Cool. Then you have some commands, tail and head. So if you only want to read the first 10 lines of a file, or you only want to read the last 10 lines of a file, there's these useful commands called tail and head. So you can tail a file and it will just show you the last couple lines. Head will show you the last. I think it's either 10 or 20 is the default value, but you can change it with a option. Tac n, and then you put the number of lines you want. Here's some text editors. We'll also go over those later. Vim, Nano, Emacs. So if you ever want to edit files through the command line or even through the graphical interface, you can use those commands to edit those files. Make sure you have the permissions to edit those files. It is really annoying when you open a file in Nano and then you try to save it. It's like, oh, you can't do that. So check for that. If you want to check the length, what line something is at, you can use word count, WC. It will basically print the file along with it will put a number for each line, counting each line. That can be useful in some situations. And then touch. This can be used to change timestamps. So if you touch a file, it'll change the timestamp that it was I think it was either last edited or made. I think it's last edited. And this can also be used to make a file. If you do touch and then a file name, it will just make an empty file for you. So that can be very useful sometimes. So these are some very helpful commands when interacting with files. So let's talk about text editors. When you use a text editor, you type the name of the text editor, and then you type the file. That's usually all you need to do. So here's some useful ones. We have Vim, which, come on, man. We'll talk about Vim in a second, don't worry. I know people want me to talk about that. So Vim is probably the most common one. It is also not great for beginners, but it is very good once you learn it. Yes? Vim is the Arch Linux of text editors. That is just a fact. It just is. So it's very powerful, but it's not really like a conventional workflow. The way you use it is a lot different from normal like a text editor you normally use. There's commands and stuff like that. So when you open a file in Vim, it'll start in viewing mode, and you can scroll up and down, but you actually have to type I if you want to start editing it. You usually escape that with, you can escape that with the escape key. I'm not a Vim user, so people will probably like get mad at me for maybe saying something wrong, but it also has built-in commands. It's very powerful if you can use it. There are so many shortcuts in Vim. It is basically all shortcuts, and that's why it's so powerful, because if you can get that down, you can edit and move through files super quickly. If you want to be like a good power user, I recommend learning Vim. It will take a while. It is sometimes if you don't know how to use it, it is actually very hard to exit. You cannot just like exit it. You have to type a command. You can type :WQ and !2 force if you want to. You can type :Q to quit without saving, or you can type ZZ. Those are all ways to quit. Have fun with that if you use it and don't know how to use it. If you want to go with the more easy to use, beginner-friendly one, we have Nano. You can just use the arrow keys, type and delete as you want. That's the one That's the one that, it's kind of just easier to use. It's good for beginners. Make sure you hit Ctrl+X to save and exit. Make sure you also run it with the correct permissions, because if you don't, it won't tell you until you try to save and be like, yeah, you can't do that, sorry. So make sure you run Nano with the correct permissions. Then if you're in the graphical interface and you want to edit stuff like Notepad or Notepad++, there's some. Emacs, I think, is the one that Debian-based Linux use, or like Ubuntu at least. gedit, I think, is the CentOS one, but basically they're graphical editors, so it works pretty much like Notepad. I think Emacs also opens in the command line, but people usually don't use it for that. So those are some text editors you can use. Start doing those Vim tutorials, because good luck. All right, so when we went over some commands before, you probably saw some stuff where there were some tags, right? What is that? So this is how you can customize commands. These are basically arguments you can pass in. You can find what the different options are by reading the man pages. They will list pretty much all of them and explain each one. So I give you a quick example. Just a good note to remember is a single tag is usually just a letter, and a double tag usually means you have to type out the word. So like, you can do ls tag a, or you can do ls tag all. Usually there's some alternates there. You can do a shortcut or a long one. But basically, when you run a command and you want to change some of the options on how it works, or you want to pass something in, you usually have to put a tag in a letter and some options, or you do a tag in a word. That's just a really important note. That's what those things are. They're just arguments you can pass in. If you want to know more about them, read the man pages. Please read the man pages. It will tell you how to use it, sometimes give you examples. It's great. Yeah. Also, you can, sometimes in some commands, you can stack letters. So this is doing tag L and tag A, but it's combining it. Works either way. So quick tip, look out for those. Here's a fun fact about Linux. It's files. It really is pretty much files all the way down. This is just a fun slide. Everything in Linux is files. Directories are files. Configuration files are files. Executables, devices are files. Even processes are kind of files. So if you ever, that's just a quick note. It's like the turtles all the way down holding up the earth. It's all files all the way down, pretty much. Fun slide. Not too important, but just keep that in mind. So let's talk about the find command. So this is a really powerful command. It's also sometimes can be hard to use, but basically helps you find stuff, helps you find files, and there are a lot of options to work with here. So you can look for stuff by name. You can look for stuff by the type of file it is. Is it a file, a link, a directory, whatever you want. That's type, and then whatever you want. You can look for who owns the file. You can look for what group owns the file. You can even find a file by the permissions. So as we saw in that beginning slide, is it 755 or is it 754? Who owns that? You can search for basically anything. There's more. I'm sure there's way more options you can use. But if you need to look, if you're looking for something, if you want to find something, use this command. It is great. Basic syntax is you do find where you want to look. If you want to look the whole thing, you just do /, or if you want to look where you are, you do. And then you put the options you want. Usually the name one is pretty good. You can also use regex, which I won't go into too much detail about now, because an intro presentation. But yeah, you can look for stuff using this command, read the man pages, learn how to use it, look for a couple examples. It's really useful. So also we're going to go back to grep. So grep is basically, it just looks for patterns. You do grep, the pattern, and then the file. Or another common way to do it is if you cat the file, so you read the contents of the file and you pipe it in, like right here. We'll talk about that later. This will also look for that pattern. You can use regex as well if you want to, but commonly you can just type in the word you're looking for or the string you're looking for, and it will look for it. So this is a really useful command if you're looking for certain stuff in like files, like say I'm looking at a log file, I want to look for a certain IP, I can grep for that IP. I can grep the IP and then the file, and it will find it for me, and it will show that whole line. This is really good when you're working with very large files. So if you have a large file, you can just like scroll through endlessly. You can use grep to find exactly what you're looking for, and it'll filter away everything you don't care about, and you can send the output of commands to it as I was talking about with this pipe. So any command you run, you can just grep for something if you're looking for something in particular. Yeah, also what makes greps bad. Trying to use regular expression on non-regular languages. Yeah, so be careful with grep, but it's very powerful if you're looking for certain words, phrases, sentences, things. Environment variables. So wow, these slides are in a really weird order. I'm sorry about that. So when you're working with the command line, basically the command line has its own variables that you can work with. You basically set them. The proper syntax is all uppercase equals whatever you want. And you can set these to, stay for the duration of the shell session by using the export command. Basically, these are just variables you can set for your command line. So if you want to have a shortcut for something like an IP or a sentence, you can just set it to work as a variable. So, and then if you want to read what that is, you can echo. When you call an environment variable, you always have to put the money sign in front of it, so it knows what it's looking for. That's how it knows it's an environment variable. These are used a lot in like bash configuration. So there's a lot of options that are used as bash variables, like the length of the history and stuff like that. You can change those. But yeah, they're really important for working with the bash command line, or really any command line you're working with. They're just command line variables. There's a lot of them. Yeah, there is a way to list them, but I purposely left that out. Aliases. So these are a little different. This is how you can set a word to you can set a command to do something different. So if I want to say, if I type word, I want it to run a command, then I can set whatever I want to run that command. So say a lot of people will use this this is kind of funny, because ls is a command, but if you alias it to ls and then this, it will try to delete your entire file system. But basically, you alias a word to a command, and whenever you type that word, it will run that command. So a lot of people use this for shortcuts. So say I don't want to just type ls dec lah every single time I run ls. You can just alias ls to ls tech lah, and it will just run that every time for you. So this can be useful for workflow stuff. Yeah, usually they're in they're in your shell config file. So every time you start that shell, it will run that and set those aliases, so you don't have to keep resetting them. If you want to see all the aliases that are currently set, you just type in alias, and it will list all of them. And if you ever want to remove an alias, you're like, that one sucks, you just type unalias and then the word, and it will delete it. So these are super useful for workflow reasons, and it's really integral to how the command line works. So process management, how do we deal with processes? So if you want to view them, almost like the task manager, you can type ps there are some options at the beginning. I know I did ps tac aux, that's a good one. And then there's top or htop. Those are a little more pretty. You can use those if you want to see like command, CPU usage, memory usage, stuff like that. But it will also list all the processes and how much CPU and memory they're using. So that's a way to view processes that are running, which is important stuff to know. If you ever want to stop something, you're like, end command, whatever, the way to do it, the kill button in Windows. On the command line, you just type kill and the process ID. So if you don't know what the process ID, usually you will use ps top or htop to list what those processes are. You take that process ID of the one you don't want, and then you can kill it. There's options for kill. I know that the common one is kill tech9, which is basically it will kill it no matter what. Can be dangerous, so be careful with that. But there's different signals you can send to it. But usually if you type kill and then the process ID, that will stop the process. Then if you ran a command and it's just hanging, you're not getting that command line back. You can do a shortcut Ctrl+X that will kill the current one being run, and that will stop it. If you want to suspend the current process, just like basically hang it, you can Ctrl+Z, and if that's the last command that got suspended, you can bring it back by typing FG, which stands for foreground, or you can type BG if you want to send it to the background. But Ctrl+X is your friend, especially if you have stuff that keeps crashing and hanging. Just Ctrl+X until it stops. It usually works. So just those are some important process management commands. All right, so let's talk about SSH. This is an important one. So how do you remotely control computers? SSH is by far the most common way to do it in Linux. It stands for SecureSHell, and it's basically the main way that people access Linux remotely. Usually it's command line. It's command line only, so if you SSH in, it will be through your command line, and you'll interact through your own command line as well. If you want to connect to anything, you do SSH, your username, so that can be root, Brayden, whatever you have it set as, and then at the IP or the host name, like if you have a DNS stuff set up. So an example of this would be SSH, my name at, that IP was on the slide before. I don't know what it does. You can look that up. It's not mine. And then another way to connect is by using this command, you will use passwords and you'll have to log in using a password. But there's also ways to use public and private keys. So if you have your private key and you want to just use basically passwordless SSH, there's a way to use SSH keys to log in. So if you have it set up correctly, basically whenever you try to SSH into that server, if it has, your keys ready to go, then it will just log in automatically. It is secure and it is passwordless, so that's nice. Look into that more. SSH keygen, men pages, or just using keys to log into SSH. So that's a lot of how Linux works and stuff. I'm going to go into some useful tips when you're using Linux that will make things a little easier, some shortcuts here and there. So as I was talking about, redirection. So if you run a command and it spits stuff out to the command line, you can redirect that to a file by using that single caret. So that's really important for, if you want to run something but you want to save it to a text file, you can do that first command and it will save whatever, like the output of whatever you run to a text file. That second one is just for suppressing, if you don't want to see error messages, I forget why I left that one in. You can do that. That 2 caret is for only error messages. And dev null is basically a directory where anything you send to that will get deleted. It doesn't exist. It'll just basically throw it away instantly. If you want to append things, so if you do that first caret, it will start a new file and rewrite it. But if you just want to add to that, you can do the 2 carets and it will add to whatever was already in that file. And you can do it backwards. You can input files into a command. So that caret will, I don't think that double caret thing works actually. I don't know why that's there. I should have checked that. But if you take the input of a file and put it into a command, you can do that with a caret in, and that will take whatever in that file and direct it to that command that you're running. Really important thing here, pipes. So whenever you run a command, if you want to take that output from that command and put it into another. So say I cat a file, it will take the output of that file and put it into Grep. So that is great stuff. It's how you can almost take the output of one command and put it into another and then process that and print it out. So basically what this would do is it would read file, and then it would take everything from file and put it into grep, and then it would look for hello, and then I can put it into less and display whatever the output of this into this is. So it's a way to string together commands so that you're taking the output for one and putting into another. You can also run inline commands. This is important for scripting more, I'd say. Usually you don't need to use that, but it's the way to run a command inline and put that in. So I'm good with that. Yep. All right. So say you just type something and then you type something else and you're like, I want to run that really long command again, but I don't want to have to type it all out. There's multiple ways to see all the commands you've run, depending on how your bash is set up. You can type history. That will list all the commands, all your command history up to a certain length, whatever you have it set. Usually, I think default is 1,000. You can search through that history by using Ctrl+R, and you can type in and be like, I want to go back to that one command. You can look for it. Say you just want to rerun the previous command. There's two ways to do this. You can just up arrow enter, usually, or you can just do bang bang. This will take the previous command and just put it straight into your terminal. The most important one on the slide, I'd say, is sudo bang bang. Say you run a command, it's like, you can't do that without being sudo. And you're like, wow, I hate you. You would just type in sudo bang bang, and that will run the last command as sudo. So you can use that bang bang in almost any situation, but sudo bang bang is a very specific, very useful thing. Now we're kind of getting into like the very interesting previous commands, but are still, if you want to use them, you can. If you type history and you see that the 12th command is something you want to run, you can just do bang 12, and it will run that command. Also, it will search for stuff. So if you want to run your last command that started with SSH, you can do bang SSH, return value of last run commands. But the ones I'd keep in mind are the sudo bang bang, because when you run something and it's like you have to run it sudo, just do that if you have sudo privileges. And the up arrow, so if you want to cycle through the commands you recently did, use the up arrow. You can, if every time you hit up, it will go to the previous one. But yeah, so those are some helpful tips if you don't want to type stuff out and you're lazy, which is a good thing. You want to do that. Use the tab button. This is true for almost any like prompt ever. It will, if you hit tab, it will try to autocomplete. So say you're typing something and that's really the only option. If you hit tab, it'll just autocomplete it for you, so you don't have to type the rest of the command. I know in Linux, if you hit it a couple times, it will display all the possibilities. So like, say you're typing something, you're like, oh, I don't know how this will finish, and you just hit tab a couple times. Sometimes it'll be like, there are 1,000 possibilities. Don't do that. But use it to autocomplete. It will help you type commands so much faster, especially when you're working with Linux, and typing commands is like pretty much everything. It's just a great way to do stuff fast. Also, make sure your terminal bell is turned off, because if you hit it and there's like no autocomplete, it will just yell at you so loudly. It's the worst thing ever. But use the tab. It helps you type stuff so much faster. It also helps you find stuff a lot faster. I think that is pretty much it. That was a lot. And I kind of went over it fast because we have a special demo time today. Does anybody have any questions before we get into our Kahoot to make sure you were paying attention? Ooh. Yes. I'll go back to that before I go to the Kahoot. And these slides will be posted. Any questions about using Linux, tips, tricks, anything? Yes. What does the tree command do? The tree command displays, it's the same thing as like ls, no, doesn't it display all your files in a tree format? So you can see where each one goes. It looks really cool. I recommend it. It can be helpful sometimes too, but it does look cool as well. All right. Kahoot time.